Only 34 paintings by the Dutch artist Johannes Vermeer are known with complete certainty, and among them is Girl with a Pearl Earring, which is without a doubt the most famous, but also one of the most enigmatic. The identity of this young woman has been a mystery for centuries. Some art historians believe she was the artist's own daughter. Others suggest she may have been a lover, but no one truly knows the answer. In this work, we see a young woman turning her head to look at us over her shoulder. She wears a blue and yellow turban and a large earring that has traditionally been identified as a pearl. We are so accustomed to this image that we risk looking at it without truly seeing it, as its familiarity can be deceptive. What appears at first glance to be a simple portrait is in fact an extraordinary demonstration of Vermeer's painterly skill, a work filled with mystery and unanswered questions that, even nearly 400 years after it was painted, continues to divide art experts today. To begin to understand this painting, we need to know that Vermeer became known in his own time for painting genre scenes. These were images that invited the viewer into the everyday life of ordinary people, almost always set within the private spaces of Dutch homes in the 17th century. In many of his works, we find carefully constructed rooms filled with tables, chairs, fabrics, and musical instruments. The walls are often decorated with maps or paintings, and simple lamps hang from the ceiling. There is almost always a window through which light enters, and sometimes even air, if it is open. Alongside artists such as Pieter de Hooch, Vermeer occasionally used doors and corridors that connect one room to another, allowing us to see different layers of a house's interior. These devices opened up the domestic space and offered brief yet intense glimpses of the private lives unfolding within it. However, Girl with a Pearl Earring completely breaks with this tradition. In this painting, we do not see a recognizable setting. The domestic space has disappeared, replaced by a dark and almost absolute background. There are no pieces of furniture, no windows, no objects to guide us. There is only the young woman and us. The outside world has been shut out to make room for an intimate and silent encounter. But this is where the first deception of the painting appears. According to recent technical studies, it has been discovered that Vermeer originally painted a green curtain in the upper right part of the background, which has almost completely vanished over time. If we look closely enough, it is still possible to detect a faint sense of light in the background. This suggests that the scene initially had a more defined setting, perhaps similar to Young Woman with a Red Hat, painted in 1669, where a female figure also turns toward the viewer, this time with a clearly recognizable tapestry behind her. Even so, the background is not the most important element we will discuss today. Even if it had originally been a dark green rather than the diffuse black we see now, the painting would remain unique. The brilliance of this work does not depend on the setting, but rather on the direct relationship it establishes with the person who looks at it. Let us now move on to analyze this woman piece by piece. The young woman's gesture rests on a very precise tension, the one that exists between drawing the viewer's gaze and waiting for something. It feels as if something has just happened outside the frame. Something has made her turn toward us. Perhaps it was a sudden interruption, and that movement still carries a faint trace of unease. Her open eyes and slightly parted lips do not convey calm, but a contained sense of anticipation. These two ideas, interruption and expectation, work together and keep the image in balance. The painting never settles into a single meaning. Here, Vermeer's usual sense of tranquility is disturbed. The scene feels more intense, more alive, and slightly unstable, as if it were suspended in a moment that has not yet resolved. Vermeer chose to present the young woman as an exotic figure. The headdress, with its simple yet highly physical folds, would have been recognized in his time as a Turkish turban, an imprecise term used to describe foreign objects associated with mystery and the allure of the East. This area of the painting is lit with extraordinary sensitivity. The fabric captures the light naturally, without relying on meticulous detail. There is no excess information, only what is necessary for the material to feel alive. For the blue tones, Vermeer used ultramarine, an extremely expensive pigment made from lapis lazuli, a stone imported from Afghanistan. The headdress itself was likely nothing more than a simple piece of fabric from the painter's own studio. And yet, Vermeer chose to reserve his most precious pigment for it, emphasizing that this element was as important to the image as the young woman herself. Then there is the famous earring. Its rounded surface reflects the light in a bright swirl. Most specialists agree that, given its size and the extremely high cost of pearls in the 17th century, it is most likely not a real pearl, but an imitation made of polished glass or metal. The visual impact of this work does not lie in detail, but in simplicity. The shine is achieved by reflecting the darker tones of the surrounding skin, reinforced by small, precisely placed touches of white, just enough to suggest its pearly texture without fully describing it. The face works in the same way. At first glance it appears simple, but it is constructed with great sophistication. The brush strokes melt into one another, creating smooth transitions between light and shadow. One only has to look at the nose, which barely separates from the right cheek, without a clear line dividing them. The cheekbone, in turn, is defined through such a subtle gradation that it almost goes unnoticed. The lips are painted with soft swirls of pink and reddish tones, with small touches of white at the corners that suggest volume and moisture. But perhaps the most revealing detail in the entire work is the slight separation between them, which allows us to glimpse something exceptional in painting of that time: the teeth. One of the reasons this painting continues to provoke such a strong reaction in those who look at it is its ambiguous expression. It seems to contain a story that no one knows. With a single breath, it feels as though she is about to move, to say something, or perhaps to form a faint smile directed at the viewer. This interpretation became widely popular after the historical novel published in 1999 by Tracy Chevalier, later reinforced by the film adaptation starring Scarlett Johansson, which imagined a romantic relationship between Vermeer and the young woman portrayed. However, there is no historical evidence to support this idea, beyond the suggestive quality that emanates from the painting itself. Another hypothesis suggests that the model may have been Maria, Vermeer's eldest daughter, who would have been around 13 years old when the work was created. But the truth is that we know so little about the painter's private life that it is impossible to identify with certainty the people who posed for him. Perhaps, in the end, insisting on discovering who the young woman was means missing the true purpose of the work. Everything points to the idea that this painting was not meant to represent a specific individual, but rather belongs to a type of image that was very popular in 17th century Holland, known as the tronie. A tronie was not a portrait in the strict sense. The word comes from Dutch and simply means face. This genre consisted of studies of heads or busts in which artists explored expressions, gestures, or striking attire, often using exotic clothing or exaggerated features. It is believed that Vermeer created several tronies, conceived not as individual portraits but as exercises in character and physiognomy. Girl with a Pearl Earring is one of them, along with study of a young woman painted between 1665 and 1667. These works were independent pieces, created for a market that sought intense, intimate, and visually captivating images rather than recognizable identities. We could say then that Girl with a Pearl Earring belongs to the tradition of the Dutch tronie, but at the same time it surpasses it with elegance. Unlike other works of the genre, this painting does not rely on exaggerated expressions or caricatured gestures, but on something far more subtle, an open and unresolved expression that resists being fixed into a single meaning. Today, Girl with a Pearl Earring is one of the most recognizable images in the history of art, but for a long time, this was not the case. Before continuing, I want to remind you that if you would like to have this work in your own collection, you can purchase it from our website. Through the link in the description, you can visit our catalog and choose your favorite works to start building your own art collection. Just like in the video you are watching, with our reproductions you can turn your home into your own personal museum. Shipping is free worldwide. You will find the link in the description to place your order. Now, let's continue. In an inventory made after Vermeer's death, two tronies painted in the Turkish manner are mentioned, which could be the first documented reference to this work. Years later, in a catalogue from a sale held in Amsterdam in 1696, the painting appears described as a portrait in antique dress, exceptionally artistic, and for a time it was also known as Girl with a Turban. The work was painted around 1665, when Vermeer was just over 30 years old and at the height of his creative maturity. However, this stability would not last long. In the following decade, the Dutch Republic went to war with France, and the resulting economic crisis severely affected the artist. His financial problems worsened to the point that, after his death in 1675, at just 43 years old, Vermeer left his family in a precarious situation. After his death, his work gradually fell into obscurity, and for nearly 2 centuries his name lost relevance, with many of his paintings no longer appreciated or even correctly attributed. It was not until the 19th century that his figure began to be reassessed. During this process, several of his works had been mistakenly attributed to his contemporary Peter de Hooch. The effort to identify and reconstruct Vermeer's body of work was largely driven by the French art critic Théophile Thoré-Berger, who is often considered responsible for the rediscovery of Vermeer. Even so, Girl with a Pearl Earring was slow to gain recognition. At an auction held in The Hague in 1881, the painting was sold for the insignificant sum of just 2 guilders and 30 cents in commission, which today would amount to only a few $dozen. It was not until the 20th century that the work began to receive sustained attention from both specialists and the general public. Gradually, it became an emblem of Vermeer's masterful use of light and his ability to create intimate, silent, and deeply human images. Today, Girl with a Pearl Earring is considered clear proof of Vermeer's artistic genius, a face that emerges from darkness with extreme economy of means and astonishing precision. It also remains alive because it does not answer our questions, but holds them. Experts continue to wonder who this young woman is, what she is thinking, and what has just happened for her to turn toward us with such an enigmatic expression. Thank you for watching the video until the end. I would love to read your hypotheses about this painting, to let your imagination run free, and to hear what your own answers might be to the questions that emerge from this image. I will be reading you in the comments. Do not forget to subscribe to our free newsletter in the description to receive 2 stories like this in your inbox every week, and I will see you in the next video.